Hello, hello, hello. I'm Knits for Sanity, and today I will be walking you through the mitered square. What is a mitered square? Well, I like to think of it as a piece of knitting magic. Why is it magical? Well, you're about to find out. First, where do you see mitered squares? In the last decade or so, things called sock blankets have really been making it around the circuit. And these are those blankets that you see hundreds and hundreds of little squares in different colors, typically using leftover yarn from knitting a pair of socks. Other places that these can be used are commonly in things like washcloths or pot holders, are other fabulous places to knit a mitered square. Now, there are a few different ways to knit a mitered square, and today I am going to take you through two of the ways that you can knit a mitered square. One way is by doing a knit 3 together decrease in the center of your stitches. Another way is by doing 2 knit 2 together decreases in the center of your stitches. The end results look pretty similar. The knit 3 together has a more obvious spine down its back. And when you flip them over, you see the same on the other side. The double decrease by knitting 2 stitches together 2 times blends in perhaps maybe a little bit better. But if you like the more pronounced statement of having the knit 3 together in the center, as I kind of do, I kind of like how this looks, that is an option. Another difference between these two that is most often felt depending on the weight of your yarn is the knit 3 together center decrease will be fatter in the middle because you've knit 3 stitches together, versus the 2 knit 2 together decreases will not have that same kind of thickness in the center. It will be a more equal, flatter shape, I guess you can say. The other difference between these two that is important to know before you begin knitting is this will have an even number of stitches that you cast on versus this will have an odd number of stitches. So let's begin. I just have some scrap yarn that I will be using here from a knitting project a couple years ago. And for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to cast on a very small number of stitches. We will say 12, and we will begin with this square, which has the knit 2 together 2 times in the center as its decrease. So I will cast on 12 stitches. You can do your cast on any way you want. I prefer the long tail, and it is my go-to cast on for most projects. The other cast on that I really like is the cable cast on. But for the purposes of this project, your long tail cast on is really probably the best one. Where are we at? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. One more. All right, so once you have an even number of stitches, it may help you to identify where the middle of this row of stitches will be. With only 12 stitches, the math is pretty easy. It's after 6 stitches. So after 6 stitches, this is where we are going to place our stitch marker. Our very first row in the mitered square will just be a knit row. It's your setup row. So we will knit 6 stitches in. And 6. We will place our stitch marker, we will place our stitch marker there, and then we will knit the last 6. All right. Here, let's pause and take a note. Your stitch marker is exactly in the middle of your row. Also, Pay attention to where your cast on tail is located, because this can be very helpful to let you know what you're doing on this row. Am I just knitting back, or am I going to be doing my decreases this row? If you used a long tail cast on, your decrease rows will have your long tail cast on tail at the end of the row. For other cast on methods, say a knitted cast on, when you do your decrease rows, your cast on tail will actually be at the beginning of your row. But I used the long tail cast on method, so my decrease rows will always have my cast on tail at the end of the row. For my decrease rows, you will knit until 2 stitches before your stitch marker. So I will knit my first 4 stitches. When you get to those 2 stitches before your stitch marker, you will knit these 2 together. You will slide your stitch marker, and then you will knit the next 2 stitches together. And then knit to the end of the row. Your next row is your knit back row. We will just slide our stitch marker over. And those are your 2 rows for making a mitered square. We will do this decrease row one more time, a little bit slower together. We will knit to 2 stitches before our stitch marker. We will knit the 2 stitches together before the stitch marker. Slide our stitch marker. Then we will knit the 2 stitches together after our stitch marker and knit the rest of the row. And then we knit the next row. We will now fly through the rest of this square. And then we will knit 2 together. Remove our stitch marker. Knit 2 together. When you're left with only 2 stitches on your needle, you could knit back one more time. However, to create a neater edge, I do suggest just knitting these 2 together right away. So you will knit these 2 stitches together, pull it through, make your cut, and secure the end. All right, this is obviously a very teeny tiny little square, and so it's not quite as easy to see what I have done, which is of course why I made the larger examples, but still you can see a little bit of the spine here on both sides. This is considered your front and this is your back, and that is how you create a mitered square using knit 2 together 2 times in the center of your decreased rows. So now you know how to do a mitered square doing knit 2 together 2 times in the center to form your square shape, which I think now you can see why I consider this magical. You cast on all of these stitches, and as you knit, it becomes a square. It's just kind of cool to see. But how do we do knit 3 together as your center decrease? I'll show you. Because this is using 3 stitches for your decrease instead of 4, we need to cast on an odd number of stitches. For this little square, I cast on 12. So for this one, we will cast on 13 stitches. Again, I prefer the long tail cast on method, but you can use whatever cast on is most comfortable for you. When you have your 13 stitches on, take a minute and look at it. We are going to be placing our stitch marker 1 stitch past the center stitch. So with 13 stitches, stitch number 7 is our center stitch, and we will place our marker after that one. So I will knit 7 in, place my stitch marker and knit the remaining 6. Now we do our decrease row. So for this one, what we will do is we will knit to 1 stitch before our center marker. Which for us will be 5 stitches. We are then going to slide this stitch to our right needle without working it. Remove our stitch marker, slide that stitch back to our left needle, place our stitch marker onto our right needle. Now we will knit the next 3 stitches together off from our working needle. You want to pull a little bit just to keep the stitches snug and neat, and then knit to the end of the row. And now we knit back. So knit all stitches, slide the stitch marker, and then I will work this decrease row with you a bit slower again so you can see. Once again, when we get to our decrease row, how do I know that for sure if I'm unable to read my stitches in the rows previously? Again, by my cast on tail. So this time I will knit to 1 stitch before my stitch marker, which will be 4 stitches. When I have 1 stitch before my stitch marker, I will pass it to my right needle. I will remove my stitch marker, pass the slipped stitch back to the left needle, put my stitch marker on my right needle, and then knit the next 3 stitches together. Of course, if you are left-handed, this would be the other way around, and then knit to the end of the row. And I will continue doing those 2 rows until I am left with just 3 stitches. All right, I have 3 stitches left on my needle. Now, I could knit back this row, but I don't want to do that. So, to remove my stitch marker, I will just slide these first 2 stitches to my right needle, remove my stitch marker, slide these stitches back, and knit these 3 stitches together. And again, why do I do this? I feel that it does create a slightly neater edge. Pull it secure and firm, and there we go. We have another teeny tiny little mitered square using the double decrease by knitting 3 stitches together in the center. Again, slightly more pronounced spine. And on the front side, slightly more pronounced as well on the front side. But otherwise, the general shape is the same. It's really just your preference for which one you prefer to do. In our next tutorial for mitered squares, I will show you how you can attach mitered squares together without having to sew them together. So stay tuned for that. If you have any questions, please put them down in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, thank you for joining me. Take care, be kind, and have a wonderful day.